In the mid-15th century, the lands of Wallachia lay tangled in a web of chaos and menace, a frontier region buffeted by the relentless advance of the Ottoman Empire and riven by internal strife. This was a time when allegiances shifted like shadows, and the balance of power teetered precariously between survival and subjugation. Amidst this turbulence rose a figure whose name would echo through history with equal parts reverence and dread: Vlad III, a prince whose reign was marked by both fierce patriotism and an unyielding commitment to order, enforced through methods so brutal they became legend. Wallachia itself was no ordinary principality. Nestled between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube River, it was a land of forests and fortresses, of small villages and sprawling estates, constantly threatened by external forces and internal rebellion alike. The Ottoman Empire, an ever-expanding juggernaut, cast its shadow ominously over the region, demanding tribute and seeking to tighten its grip on the Balkan territories. Within this cauldron of uncertainty, Vlad emerged not as a mere nobleman, but as a symbol of defiance, a ruler determined to carve out a sovereign path in a world where power was often measured in blood and fear. Vlad III, later known as Vlad the Impaler, bore a reputation that was as complex as the land he sought to govern. To some, he was a national hero, an indomitable force standing between Wallachia and the encroaching Ottoman tide. To others, especially his enemies and those who suffered under his iron fist, he was a figure of terror, a man whose sense of justice was inseparable from unimaginable cruelty. His governance was not gentle. It was a reign forged in the crucible of survival, where mercy was a luxury few could afford. Such duality defined Vlad's legacy. His name conjures images of a fierce warrior prince, clad in armor, riding through forests to rally his people against invaders and traitors alike. Yet, alongside this heroic image lay the darker truths, accounts of ruthless punishments and macabre displays designed to instill dread and obedience. These stories were not mere exaggerations but reflections of a calculated strategy. To govern a fractured land, Vlad wielded fear as a weapon as potent as any sword. The contrast between Vlad's legendary status and the gruesome reality of his rule was stark. Tales of his punitive executions, most famously Impalement, circulated widely, painting a picture of a ruler who believed in absolute justice enforced without hesitation or mercy. Such methods were not random acts of savagery, but deliberate tools to maintain order in a realm where lawlessness threatened to overwhelm. Vlad's intent was clear: to instill a profound fear that would deter enemies, both foreign and domestic, from challenging his authority. In a region where alliances were fragile and betrayal commonplace, such severity was often deemed necessary. The political instability that plagued Wallachia demanded a ruler who could command respect and fear in equal measure. Vlad understood that the survival of his principality depended not only on military strength, but on a psychological dominion over his subjects and adversaries. His methods, though brutal, were a means to an end, a way to unify a fractured land under a single, uncompromising authority. The legend of Vlad the Impaler thus took shape against this backdrop of turmoil and threat. His reputation as a ruthless enforcer of order spread swiftly, fueled by the vivid and horrifying nature of his punishments. These acts served a dual purpose. They were both justice meted out to wrongdoers and a spectacle designed to broadcast the consequences of defiance to all who might consider rebellion. Execution sites were chosen carefully, often in visible locations, so that the message of terror could reach far and wide. Yet, beyond the fear and horror, Vlad's rule also inspired a sense of national pride among many Wallachians. In an era when the very identity of their land was under siege, Vlad became a symbol of resistance, a leader who refused to submit to foreign domination and who exacted a harsh but necessary discipline to preserve his people's autonomy. His legacy, therefore, cannot be understood solely through the lens of cruelty. It must be seen as the product of a desperate struggle for survival in a brutal age. To fully grasp the significance of Vlad's reign, one must consider the precarious position Wallachia held in the geopolitical landscape of 15th-century Eastern Europe. The principality was a buffer zone, a contested space between Christian Europe and the Islamic Ottoman Empire. Each side sought to impose its will, and Wallachia's rulers were caught in the middle, forced to navigate a perilous path between submission and resistance. Vlad's rise to power and his notorious methods reflect this harsh reality, a ruler shaped by the relentless pressures of his time. In essence, Vlad the Impaler was a product of his environment, a man whose identity was forged in conflict and whose rule was defined by a singular purpose: to secure and defend Wallachia through any means necessary. His story is a testament to the complexities of leadership in a world where power was inseparable from violence, and where the line between heroism and terror was often blurred. As history would come to show, Vlad's reign was not only a chapter of fearsome justice, but also a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle for national sovereignty in Eastern Europe. Thus, the legend of Vlad the Impaler was born, not merely from the bloodshed he commanded, but from the turbulent times that demanded it. His name would endure, etched into history as both a beacon of resistance and a cautionary tale of the extremes to which power can be wielded. To understand Vlad is to peer into the heart of a dark and violent era, where the survival of a people depended on the iron will of a ruler unafraid to embrace the terror necessary to shape his destiny. The political landscape that Vlad III inherited was one of relentless upheaval and peril. Wallachia was a principality caught in the throes of an existential struggle, not only against the external forces of the expanding Ottoman Empire, but also amid internal rivalries that fractured its nobility and threatened its very survival. This chaos was the crucible in which Vlad's character and reign were forged, shaped by a relentless determination to reclaim authority and impose order where none had existed before. Vlad's early life was marked by hardship and political intrigue. Born into the noble House of Drăculești, he was thrust into the maelstrom of power struggles that defined Wallachia's turbulent history. His father, Vlad II Dracula, had navigated a treacherous path between allegiance to the Hungarian crown and submission to the Ottomans. In an effort to secure his loyalty, the Ottomans took Vlad and his younger brother Radu as political hostages, a practice common in the era to ensure the compliance of vassal rulers. It was during this captivity, spent at the Ottoman court, that Vlad was exposed to the brutal realities of power and the precariousness of his position. This period of involuntary residence among the Ottomans left a profound mark on Vlad. Far from breaking his spirit, it steeled his resolve to reclaim his birthright and restore Wallachia independence on his own terms. Emerging from captivity, Vlad was no longer simply a nobleman. He was a man shaped by hardship, hardened by experience, and driven by a fierce determination to assert control over his fragmented homeland. Vlad's ascent to power was neither straightforward nor assured. The internal politics of Wallachia were riddled with rival factions, each vying for influence and willing to ally with external forces to gain advantage. The Ottoman Empire, ever watchful of its borderlands, manipulated these divisions to maintain dominance. Against this backdrop, Vlad's military skill and political acumen became his tools for survival and dominance. He forged strategic alliances with neighboring powers, navigated the treacherous waters of diplomacy, and did not hesitate to employ force where necessary. But the challenges were immense. Wallachia was a land where lawlessness thrived, where banditry and rebellion were constant threats, and where the loyalty of the boyars, the noble class, was often fickle. To stabilize his rule, Vlad recognized that traditional methods would not suffice. The chaos demanded extraordinary measures. His vision of leadership was one of unyielding order enforced by fearsome justice. The adoption of brutal tactics was not born from wanton cruelty, but from a calculated necessity to impose discipline and deter insurrection. Vlad's reputation as a ruthless enforcer grew quickly. His methods were severe, often horrifying, but they served a clear purpose: to restore and maintain order in a land teetering on the edge of collapse. The severity of his punishments sent a clear message that betrayal, lawlessness, and defiance would be met with uncompromising retribution. In a world where authority was often challenged, such ferocity was a tool to consolidate power and command respect. The political chaos also extended beyond Wallachia's borders. The Ottoman Empire's relentless expansion threatened to swallow the principality whole, and Vlad's reign was punctuated by conflicts aimed at resisting this domination. His military campaigns were marked by a fierce determination to defend his homeland, but they were also accompanied by ruthless acts designed to weaken enemies psychologically as much as physically. The use of terror tactics, including the infamous impalements, was part of a broader strategy to dissuade both internal dissent and external invasion. Vlad's relationship with the Ottomans was complex and fraught with tension. Having been a hostage in their court, he understood their tactics and ambitions intimately. Yet, his desire to maintain Wallachian sovereignty placed him in direct opposition to their aims. This enmity fueled his brutal methods, as he sought not only to defend his realm, but to send a clear warning to any who might challenge his authority. His reign was thus defined by a relentless struggle against both internal rivals and the overwhelming might of an empire determined to expand. The necessity of harsh justice in such a fractured and violent land cannot be overstated. Vlad's willingness to embrace brutality was a reflection of the brutal age in which he lived, a time when rulers were measured by their ability to maintain control through strength and fear. His reputation was a weapon as much as his sword, and his name became synonymous with a justice so severe that it transcended conventional norms. This reputation, while terrifying to many, was instrumental in establishing the order Vlad sought. In this context, Vlad's rise was more than a simple seizure of power. It was an assertion of a new kind of rule. His military prowess combined with a strategic use of terror allowed him to impose a level of stability unprecedented in Wallachia's recent history. The nobility, often fractious and divided, found themselves compelled to submit to his authority, knowing the consequences of opposition. The broader populace, caught between loyalty and fear, came to recognize Vlad as the arbiter of law in a world otherwise marked by chaos. His reign also highlighted the delicate balance between leadership and cruelty. While his methods were undeniably harsh, they were calculated to achieve a greater purpose: the survival and independence of Wallachia. Vlad's justice was swift and brutal, but it was also consistent, ensuring that lawlessness and betrayal could not fester unchecked. This consistency fostered a grudging respect among many of his subjects, who saw in him a ruler willing to do what was necessary to protect them. Vlad's early experiences, from captivity to his rise amidst political turmoil, shaped a ruler who understood the brutal realities of power. His reign was not the product of whim or cruelty for cruelty's sake, but was born from a calculated response to the dire circumstances facing his principality. In a land where the strong survived and the weak perished, Vlad's harsh justice was both a weapon and a shield. Thus, Vlad III emerged not only as a fierce military leader, but as a ruler whose authority rested on an unambiguous message: order would be maintained at any cost. His ascent was marked by a blend of strategic brilliance and ruthless enforcement, a combination that would define his legacy. The political chaos of Wallachia demanded such a leader, and Vlad answered that call with a resolve that would etch his name into history as both a hero and a figure of terror. Vlad's reign was distinguished by an array of execution methods so horrific that they transcended the realm of mere punishment and entered the domain of calculated psychological warfare. Among these, impalement stood as the most infamous, a gruesome spectacle designed not only to inflict unbearable pain, but to send a message that would reverberate far beyond the borders of Wallachia. This method was not a random act of cruelty, but a deliberate instrument of terror, crafted to maximize fear and solidify Vlad's control over both his enemies and his own subjects. Impalement involved the slow, agonizing insertion of a sharpened wooden stake through the body of the condemned, often beginning near the lower regions and driven upward, resulting in a prolonged death marked by excruciating pain and a public display of suffering. This slow, drawn-out demise was intended to serve as a stark warning. Rebellion, treachery, or defiance would lead to a fate so dreadful that it would deter others from similar actions. The horror of witnessing a victim slowly perish on a wooden spike was a psychological weapon that struck terror into all who beheld it. But impalement was only one of several brutal methods Vlad employed. His executions also included dismemberment, where limbs were severed in acts of calculated cruelty, and other tortures that stripped victims not only of their lives, but of their dignity. These punishments were often public spectacles, staged in places where they could be widely seen, market squares, crossroads, or near fortresses, ensuring that the terror extended beyond the individual victim to the broader population. The choice of location was strategic. The visibility of these acts ensured that the fear they inspired permeated the very fabric of society. The symbolic nature of impalement and other executions was profound. Beyond inflicting physical agony, these acts communicated a narrative about the consequences of disloyalty and the absolute power wielded by Vlad. The victims, often enemies of the state, rival nobles, or Ottoman spies, became living embodiments of the price of dissent. Their mutilated bodies served as grim monuments to Vlad's authority, reinforcing the idea that his justice was swift, unyielding, and merciless. Vlad's use of these brutal executions extended beyond mere punishment. They functioned as psychological warfare aimed at destabilizing enemy morale. Ottoman forces, upon encountering reports and sightings of impaled captives along Wallachian roads or near borderlands, were struck not only by the physical horror but by the message that resistance would be met with unparalleled savagery. This reputation spread fear that transcended the battlefield, sowing doubt and hesitation among invading troops and rebellious factions alike. Within Wallachia, these methods also served to suppress rebellion and maintain order. The nobility, known for their fractiousness and ambition, were reminded constantly of the dangers of disloyalty. Peasants and commoners, too, were made acutely aware of the consequences of lawlessness. Vlad's justice was not tempered by mercy, it was absolute. This harshness, while terrifying, contributed to a semblance of stability in a land otherwise plagued by disorder. Execution sites were carefully chosen to maximize their impact. Roads leading into Wallachia often bore rows of impaled bodies, grotesque sentinels warning travelers and would-be invaders alike. Town centers displayed the remains of traitors, their mutilated limbs arranged to create a spectacle impossible to ignore. These macabre installations were as much a part of Vlad's governance as his military campaigns. They transformed the landscape into a gallery of terror, where the consequences of opposition were etched in wood and blood. The strategic deployment of such gruesome methods reflected Vlad's understanding of fear as a tool of governance. It was not enough to defeat enemies in battle. Their spirits had to be broken. This psychological domination extended to his own people, who learned to equate rebellion with an unimaginable fate. By intertwining justice with spectacle, Vlad ensured that his rule was not merely enforced by force but ingrained in the collective consciousness of Wallachia. Moreover, Vlad's execution methods were a calculated response to the precariousness of his position. Surrounded by enemies and beset by internal dissent, he could ill afford leniency. The slow, agonizing deaths he orchestrated were meant to forestall future insurrections by embedding a deep-seated fear of punishment. This terror was a currency that paid dividends in obedience and suppressed potential dissent before it could ignite. The stories of Vlad's cruelty soon became legendary, spreading beyond Wallachia's borders and adding to his fearsome reputation across Europe. While some viewed these tales as exaggerations or propaganda, the consistency and scale of the executions suggested a ruler unafraid to wield terror as a weapon. This notoriety was a double-edged sword. It isolated Vlad diplomatically, yet it also reinforced his position as a formidable opponent to the Ottomans and a ruler who commanded respect through fear. In the context of medieval governance, Vlad's methods were extreme but not entirely unprecedented. The era was one where rulers often employed severe punishments to maintain control, yet Vlad's use of impalement and public displays of mutilation stood out for their brutality and psychological impact. His reign epitomized the darker aspects of medieval justice, where the line between law and cruelty was blurred, and where power was asserted through terror as much as through legitimate authority. The execution methods also served a broader narrative of legitimacy. By punishing traitors and enemies with such severity, Vlad positioned himself as the protector of Wallachia's sovereignty and the enforcer of its laws. The spectacle of punishment was intertwined with the assertion of his sovereignty, a visceral demonstration that his will was law and that betrayal would be met with horrors beyond the imagination. Ultimately, Vlad's brutal execution methods were not mere acts of sadism, but integral components of his strategy to consolidate power and maintain control in a land beset by threats. The slow, agonizing deaths of his victims were designed to echo through the valleys and forests, a chilling reminder that defiance would be met with relentless retribution. In a world where strength was measured by the ability to command fear, Vlad the Impaler perfected the art of terror as governance. Through these horrifying practices, Vlad crafted a legacy that would endure for centuries, a legacy of fear, power, and the dark interplay between justice and cruelty. His methods were a mirror reflecting the brutal realities of his time, a stark testament to the lengths a ruler might go to preserve his realm and impose his will in a world ruled by violence and uncertainty. The process of execution under Vlad the Impaler was a grim ritual, meticulously designed to amplify suffering and broadcast a message of ruthless authority. The moment a condemned victim was seized marked the beginning of a slow descent into agony, a calculated sequence of cruelty that served both punishment and propaganda. Captured enemies, traitors, or rebels faced a fate that was as much about spectacle as it was about justice, their torment unfolding in full view of an assembled public whose reactions ranged from terror to morbid fascination. Impalement, the signature method of execution, began with the victim being firmly secured, often stripped of clothing to heighten their vulnerability and humiliation. The wooden stake, sharpened to a cruel point, was carefully prepared to ensure it would penetrate the body with a horrifying graduality. The victim was then impaled through the lower body, typically the rectum or vagina, with the stake driven upward through the torso. This was no swift death. Rather, it was a prolonged ordeal where the victim's body slowly succumbed to shock, blood loss, and organ damage. Death could take hours or even days, each moment an excruciating testament to Vlad's merciless justice. The calculated cruelty of this method extended beyond the physical agony. Victims were often left impaled in public places, at crossroads, near city gates, or alongside roads, to serve as grotesque warnings to any who might contemplate treason or insubordination. These macabre displays transformed the landscape into a gallery of horror, where the sight of impaled bodies became a chilling reminder of the price of defiance. The public nature of these executions was instrumental in embedding fear deeply within the community's psyche. Crowds gathered to witness these events, their reactions a complex mixture of dread, fascination, and political acquiescence. For many, the executions were a gruesome form of entertainment, a spectacle that reinforced the power of the prince while offering a visceral lesson in the consequences of rebellion. The atmosphere at these sites was charged, a tense blend of silence and whispered horror, punctuated sometimes by the anguished cries of the dying. This public witnessing was no accident. Vlad understood that the effectiveness of his terror relied heavily on its visibility and communal experience. Beyond impalement, Vlad's cruelty manifested in other forms of physical degradation designed to break the spirit as much as the body. Dismemberment, for instance, was employed to horrifying effect. Limbs were severed with brutal efficiency, often in public, leaving victims mutilated and exposed. Such acts were intended not only to punish but to shame, stripping victims of their humanity and serving as a stark deterrent to others. The psychological impact on witnesses, both enemies and subjects, was profound, reinforcing a climate where disobedience was unthinkable. The strategic placement of these execution sites was a key element in Vlad's method of governance. Roads leading into Wallachia were lined with impaled bodies, grotesquely arranged to greet travelers and invading forces with a message of unyielding resistance. Town squares displayed the remains of traitors, their mutilated forms a stark contrast to the bustling life around them. These sites became grim landmarks, etched into the collective memory of the populace and foreign observers alike. For Vlad's enemies, the terror inflicted was not merely physical, but deeply psychological. Ottoman invaders, upon encountering the horrors of impaled captives, found themselves confronted with a foe who wielded fear as effectively as any army. The spectacle of such executions undermined morale, sowed panic, and sometimes deterred attacks altogether. Rival nobles within Wallachia, aware of the brutal consequences of defiance, were forced into submission, their ambitions curtailed by the ever-present threat of Vlad's merciless justice. This dual role of executions, as both punishment and propaganda, was central to Vlad's consolidation of power. The terror they inspired reinforced his iron rule, creating a social order maintained less by affection than by fear. In this world, obedience was secured through the knowledge that betrayal would be met with horrors that transcended ordinary punishment. Vlad's reign thus became synonymous with a justice so severe that it left no room for mercy or dissent. The impact of these executions extended beyond the immediate victims and witnesses. They shaped the political landscape of Wallachia, instilling a pervasive atmosphere of control that permeated all levels of society. The common people, while horrified by the gruesome displays, learned to associate order with Vlad's harsh measures. The boyars, ever wary of their own positions, recognized the futility of challenging a ruler willing to exact such savage retribution. This climate of fear was instrumental in stabilizing a realm otherwise prone to fragmentation and rebellion. Yet, the horror of Vlad's execution methods also carried a symbolic weight. By meting out such extreme punishments, he positioned himself as the ultimate arbiter of justice, a ruler whose authority was absolute and unassailable. The public spectacle of death served to erase any ambiguity about the consequences of treason, reinforcing the legitimacy of Vlad's rule in the eyes of his subjects and adversaries. The brutality was not gratuitous, but a calculated assertion of sovereignty in a time when power was constantly contested. The psychological dimension of Vlad's executions was as important as their physical terror. By making death a public, drawn-out spectacle, he transformed punishment into a form of theater, one designed to instill a lasting memory of his dominion. The agonizing deaths, the mutilated bodies, and the widespread dissemination of these images created a narrative of power intertwined with fear. This narrative extended beyond Wallachia's borders, shaping how Vlad was perceived by neighboring states and future generations. Among the victims of Vlad's justice were not only external foes, but also those within his own court or nobility who dared to betray him. The calculated nature of his cruelty ensured that these executions served as internal warnings as much as external deterrents. The message was clear: loyalty was rewarded with protection, but betrayal invited a slow, excruciating demise on a wooden stake. This internal policing through terror was crucial in a political environment rife with intrigue and shifting alliances. In sum, the execution process under Vlad the Impaler was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of cruelty, designed to degrade the victims physically and symbolically, while simultaneously consolidating political power through fear. The crowds that witnessed these events were participants in a grim ritual where justice and terror merged, where the boundaries between punishment and propaganda vanished. Vlad's calculated cruelty not only punished the guilty, but reshaped the political and social order, embedding his rule in a landscape marked by dread and obedience. Through these public spectacles of suffering, Vlad succeeded in turning execution into an instrument of governance, a tool that extended beyond death to enforce a lasting reign of terror. The impact of these displays was profound, leaving an indelible mark on Wallachian society and on history itself, a haunting testament to the brutal realities of medieval power and control. Vlad the Impaler's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of both heroism and horror, a duality that continues to captivate and challenge historians and popular imagination alike. In Romania, he is venerated as a national hero, a fierce defender of Wallachian sovereignty who stood unyielding against the encroaching Ottoman Empire. His ruthless methods, while terrifying, were seen by many as necessary measures in an era when survival depended on strength and the ability to inspire fear in equals and enemies. Yet beyond his homeland, Vlad's name became synonymous with terror, a figure whose reputation as a cruel and merciless ruler cast a long shadow over European history. The stories of Vlad's brutal executions, impalements, dismemberments, and public spectacles of death have shaped his enduring myth, transforming him into a symbol of medieval cruelty. These tales, passed down through generations and amplified by foreign chroniclers and later popular culture, have painted a portrait of a man who wielded violence as a tool of governance with terrifying efficacy. His reign became a narrative of extremes, where justice was inseparable from fear, and power was asserted through unimaginable cruelty. This legacy invites reflection on the ethical and moral dimensions of Vlad's rule. His normalization of extreme violence highlights the brutal realities of medieval power struggles, where the line between justice and savagery was often indistinct. Vlad's willingness to embrace terror as a governing principle reveals the harsh choices leaders faced in a world marked by constant threats and fragile allegiances. The ethical implications of his reign ripple through history, prompting debates about the balance between security and humanity and the costs of absolute authority. Yet Vlad's transformation into a cultural icon speaks to a deeper resonance beyond his acts of cruelty. In Romania, he symbolizes resistance against foreign domination, a figure who embodies the struggle for national identity and sovereignty. His reputation, though fearsome, is intertwined with pride in his uncompromising defense of his land and people. This ambivalence, of hero and villain, protector and tormentor, reflects the complexities of history itself, where figures are rarely one-dimensional and legacies are shaped by perspective as much as by fact. The fascination with Vlad the Impaler's brutal methods endures as a lens through which to examine medieval brutality and the use of fear in governance. His reign offers a stark window into a past where terror was not only a byproduct of power, but a deliberate strategy to maintain it. This understanding enriches our comprehension of how rulers navigated the precarious dynamics of authority, rebellion, and survival. Vlad's story is a testament to the lengths to which power can be exercised, and the human capacity both to inflict and endure suffering in the name of order. Moreover, Vlad's legacy extends beyond history into the realms of myth and popular culture, where his persona has been adapted, exaggerated, and immortalized. From vampire legends to cinematic portrayals, the figure of Vlad the Impaler has transcended his historical context to become an archetype of the dark ruler, a symbol of the intertwining of fear, power, and mortality. This cultural afterlife of his legacy reflects the enduring human fascination with the macabre and the extremes of human behavior. At the same time, Vlad's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and the ethical costs of ruling through terror. His reign exemplifies how extreme measures, while effective in the short term, can leave a legacy fraught with moral ambiguity and historical controversy. The normalization of such brutality raises questions about the limits of justice and the potential for cruelty to be justified in the name of security and order. In the broader sweep of history, Vlad the Impaler's legacy is a reminder of the complex interplay between leadership, violence, and identity. His life and reign illuminate the challenges faced by rulers in a violent and unstable world, where the pursuit of power often entailed harsh and unforgiving choices. At the same time, his enduring myth underscores how history is shaped not only by actions, but by the stories told about those actions, stories that evolve and resonate through generations. Ultimately, Vlad the Impaler remains a figure who embodies the paradoxes of power, capable of inspiring both fear and admiration, a man whose brutal methods were matched by an unyielding commitment to his land's survival. His legacy invites ongoing reflection on the nature of justice, the use of violence in governance, and the enduring human struggle to balance authority with morality. The story of Vlad the Impaler is not merely one of cruelty, but of the complexities of ruling in a world where freedom and tyranny often stand in uneasy tension.